In this video, we're going to go over some basics of the render preview window and lighting so we can start learning all the things needed to set up our render. So the first thing that we're going to do is we have our chessboard set up. I'm going to go to the render tab, and now let's just kind of explore this tab before we look at anything. So let's start here. We have a perspective viewport. It's probably set to perspective when you open it. It might be set to one of the cameras or one of the lights or whatever, but just know that this is kind of a customizable window. You can set it to whatever you want. This is the render preview window. It has a big play button. We'll wait on hitting that play button. Over here we have our normal collection of items, and down here, if you remember in one of the previous videos, we modified some of the materials. All the materials are here so we have quick access to them. And then over here you'll see this is normally that settings window. So if I go all the way back to our normal window, normally the settings window is pretty little, but in this one, realistically, you change the settings a lot when you're rendering stuff. So giving you more real estate for those settings is kind of a cool thing over here. So the only other thing would be this little window down here. We're not going to really worry about that as for now. So let's hit this big play button and see what happens. So this is a render preview. So if we were to hit the render button, we really don't know what that is yet, but this is going to be the result of that. So what we can do here is this window, I can switch from all my different views, but I actually want to go into the camera. So right now there's current selection, render camera, or camera. We only have one camera in the scene, so any of these are going to lead to the same thing. So now if I look at this window and compare it to this one, they kind of coincide with each other. There's these black bars right here, black bars here. This is the actual rendering area, as well as this right here. So when we want to move the camera, we can just have this down here, and we can just do our normal navigation. So Alt left click to kind of look down, hold Alt and Shift, left click, and we move it up, and we can see that this is updating in real time. You can see that right now it's kind of pixelated, and then as soon as I stop moving, it'll start getting more and more closer to being rendered. So again, this is just a render preview. This isn't the actual render you can save out. This is just so you can kind of see what would happen if you'd hit the render. So the quality is not as good as it would be, and it really isn't as big as it would be either. It's just, again, just a preview so you can kind of see what's happening. So let's zoom in on these materials and kind of see what's going on here. So again, the only settings I changed on these were the color. I changed them to that darker brown color. So you can see that they're kind of shiny. We can change that. There's shadows going on. We can kind of affect those a little bit. But again, we're going to try to keep this pretty simple. So let's go in and change this material. So black pieces, I want to confirm that this is the black pieces. Make sure I labeled it right. So just turn it off. Yep, that correlates to this. Turn it back on. Open up these settings. Click on this material property right here. Now let's change a few things around just to see kind of what happens. So again, we've already went over what happens when we change the color. We'll actually make the pieces a little bit darker. You can see that updates in real time. So just click off. Oops. So when I clicked off, I actually selected this chessboard, so my properties over here changed to the properties of the chessboard. So I can just click this material again, and they'll come right back up. So when it comes to settings, let's go ahead. We've already messed with color. Let's mess with the specular amount. So right now it's set to 4%. So if you're not sure what something is, you can always undo what you did. Let's just set it to 100% and see what happens. Wow. So everything gets really, really shiny, almost like chrome. So you can think of that specular amount as kind of how shiny or reflective an object is. So let's put it back to 4. And we get little highlights. So let's just double it and see what happens. So again, the little shine amount goes up a little bit. So I want these to feel a little bit closer to wood. So again, if wood's kind of finished and has like veneer on it or whatever, it's gonna be pretty shiny. But I want to make this feel a little bit older, so I'm gonna knock that specular amount down. So let's try 1.5%. And you can see it still has a little bit of a highlight to it, but it's not as bright as it was before. So real quick, let's zoom over to these pieces and look at these. So these would probably be the white pieces. Let's just turn them off to make sure. Yep. So let's assume that these are made out of the same material, so we'll put the specular amount of these down to 1.5 as well. And you can kind of mess around with this and have fun with it. I'm going to take the color, and desaturate it a little bit, and just darken it up just a little bit. Just because, again, the highlight on there is a little bit much. So again, that really works for specular amount. Let's go ahead. We have the board dark and the board light. So let's modify these real quick. And again, the board light and dark are going to be the white and black checkers on here. So now let's change a new setting. Let's go through and actually change this roughness setting. So again, we're doing the board light first. So roughness, let's take that down to 0. Dark roughness, take that down to 0. And it's kind of hard to tell. Let's actually zoom in. Maybe see this a little bit better. You can actually see the pieces reflecting off the board. So if I just go ahead and adjust this piece a little bit, pull it down, you can see where it's reflecting right here, and I can even see that other pawn, you can see under it right here. So the glossiness amount, let's undo that. So the other thing that you'll notice is as I'm adjusting the camera, those are things that get saved in the undo history. So if I move right, move right, move right, undo, undo, undo. So if I was in the perspective and moved and then hit the undo button, it's not going to move the camera at all. So again, it's just the camera. The camera is an object that we're actually moving. So let's go back to our board dark material. Oops. So right now it said I have the board dark or board light material selected, but over here it's still kind of sticking to that mesh because technically I have the mesh selected right here and I have the material selected. So technically there's more things selected over here. So I just need to go to this material rough right here, and this is going to be the window that has my material setting. So again, we have that roughness set to 0. So again, this is the board light. We see that reflection. Let's actually do this to the board dark. So let's take that roughness amount all the way up to 100%. And you can see now there's absolutely no reflection of that chess piece in there. So I want the chess pieces to feel a little bit old, but I want this board to have like kind of like a glass finish to it. Let's take that roughness, drop it back down to 0, and let's just increase that specular amount. So let's double it. So now you can see that reflection is a little bit stronger. If I was to make this really high, let's do something like 90, now it's like a mirror finish. We don't really want it that bright, but again, if I zoom out, that's kind of a cool effect where, like, if this was a mirror, this would be like frosted mirror right here. This would be kind of polished mirror. So again, you could potentially have fun with this. So roughness is 0, so let's take the specular, this one up to like 8. So again, now it feels like a frosted and a non-frosted glass. Probably don't want it to be that intense. So let's take our specular amount, let's just put it at 10%. There we go, I like that. Let's put this one at 10% as well. Again, both specular values 10%, roughness values at 0. So let's take the dark one because it's a little bit easier to see. And let's take its roughness a little bit higher. Let's take it to 10% and see what happens. Let that do its thing. So again, it's still reflective. We'll give that a little bit to render. But you can see this one is a little bit more blurry, and this one's really, really crisp. So I kind of prefer that blurry look. So I'll actually have the roughness for both of these set to 10%. And you'll see the white one update. And there we go. So again, specular amount, fun to change. Roughness amount, pretty fun to change. Let's do one more. So we're doing our dark board pieces. Let's change this Fresnel amount. Right now it's set to 100, so let's set it to 0. And it's kind of hard to tell. Let's turn it back to 100. I'll just hit the undo button. This is with it on. We're set to 100%. This is with it off. So what Fresnel is, you can think of that as like a fake backlight. There's not actually a light behind here that's kind of illuminating these areas, and especially right here. But again, you can see this little highlight disappears. So again, some people like Fresnel, some people don't. Again, some people, I mean, everyone has their own preferences, but a lot of times with Fresnel is kind of cheating another light. So some people like to just put a second or a third light, have a 3-point lighting setup, whatever, and have that control over that light, because then they can change the color of it, change the angle, do all kinds of stuff. So there's one other thing that I want to mention with this render preview, and that is, let's zoom out on here so we have more geometry going on, and then let it go. You'll see that this, realistically, it renders kind of quick. There's not a lot of complicated stuff going on in this scene, but the one thing that it does do, if for some reason you have a more complicated scene, if I'm moving my mouse around right here, it's going to actually take priority over the spot that I'm moving. So if I'm just kind of moving my mouse in a circle right in this area, this is the area that I want to see if it looks good as I'm adjusting materials and whatnot, I can just move my mouse there. It'll kind of prioritize the rendering right here, that region. And then when it's finished, it'll just go through and randomly calculate everything else. Well, I guess not randomly, but we're not going to worry about that right now. So another thing I want to kind of pay attention to is this render preview. So the thing is, I can either move my mouse down here and navigate, and technically I can just hold Alt and navigate up here. I don't really need this camera down here. But sometimes it's easier to see this because it updates in real time where this gets all blurry. The thing that I want to focus on would be these little lines. It's not really smooth here anymore. You can kind of see where there's an edge right here, and it just doesn't look very good. So we have the black pieces selected. So the setting for this that we want to change is right here, the smoothing angle. Right now it says 40 degrees. So just for an extreme, so we can kind of see what happens, let's actually set it to 0 degrees. Hit enter. So at 0 degree smoothing, it just says absolutely every edge in our mesh is hard. So if I look over, these pieces aren't affected because they're a different material, but all these ones, it looks kind of like old school 3D, like a Nintendo 64 or I don't know, maybe 32X, just those old game systems where they didn't have that dynamic smoothing. So again, this isn't really the look we're going for. Its default was 40, so let's put it back to that. And saying some of these hard edges I actually like this little hard edge right here. So if we think of math, a 180 degree angle would be kind of a flat line. So let's just pop it all the way up to 180. And see, that smooths over the entire surface. We actually lose some of the definition that we modeled in here. But again, everything, absolutely everything is smooth. Let's look at a lot of these pieces at once. You can see all the way down the list, everything is smooth all the way across. And some things like this, they look a little bit goofy. So it was at 40. Let's put it to, let's say, 80 and see what happens. So again, a 90 degree angle would be kind of like a right angle. So now we still get those hard edges. This is something that you can just drop it by a little bit at a time until you get kind of your desired result. So there we go. I think I'll just leave it at 50. Let's go over here and make sure this piece looks good. So yeah, 40 just to compare. Had a few hard edges in here we really didn't want, but it's looking like 50. It's kind of doing the trick for us. So there's more settings in here. I won't go over all of them, obviously. So again, let's do that same thing to the white pieces. Smoothing angle, set that to 50. So now those should be smooth. So this next thing that I want to address is going to be my light source. So again, we have some shadows cast right here. So obviously the light is coming from up here somewhere. I mean, everything in the sky looks bright. I can't actually see that light because again, it's just kind of a simulated light. There's not actually a sun in the air. But what I can do is over here under camera, I can change this to light, directional light, and now this is where the light is pointing. So again, over here we have a directional light. There's only one in the scene. If I was to click this and turn it off, it's going to turn our light off in the scene, so now everything's really dark. But again, we don't want it to be that dark. So let's just orbit around. Oh, there's our chessboard. So now, as I rotate around the board, I can get different degrees of shadow. So now what I can do is I can get kind of my ideal angle. Let's say I want to render it from this angle right here. Now I can go ahead and adjust my light accordingly so the shadows are where I want. And again, just looking at these chess pieces, normally with the lighting, you want it to kind of show your model in the best light. So again, like a straight top-down view, something like this. This isn't going to be very good. It doesn't really show off my models. So usually I want to have the light usually on the same side as the camera is, and then it can just be off one direction or another. And again, that's just going to base on kind of where you want the shadows to be. So we'll say something like this is good. And the other thing, it doesn't matter if I zoom in the light or zoom out the light with this directional light. It's always going to be the same. Just think of this light as infinitely far away, and it doesn't have any like fall off properties, like it doesn't decay over time. So there's a bunch of different lights in Modo. We're not going to go over those yet. We'll eventually get into them. But for now, let's just focus on this directional light. So now with my render over here, one thing that I want to be mindful of is right now I have super crisp shadows. And normally this isn't really the best thing to have when you have lower poly objects like this. And even if you have higher poly objects, just having really sharp angles on your lights just usually doesn't do good, because like right here, it's actually a really good example of this. You can see like the faceting of the shadow. Normally shadows aren't this intense. It's not like we have a flashlight 3 inches away from this thing, so it's casting really intense shadows. Same thing over here. If you just look at the shape of this, it just doesn't read very good. It doesn't look very professional at all. So again, keeping our lighting set up really simple. I'm just going to click on this directional light. It's going to give me a handful of settings. So the only two that we're going to change for right now would be this amount right here. It's radian amount. It's at 3, so if we set it to 2, our light's going to be a little less intense. So let's actually set it to something like 2.5. And you can kind of mess around with this and find something that you like. And the only other setting we're going to change is this spread angle. You can kind of think of this as how the light spreads out. And the higher the spread angle, the more kind of diffuse your shadows are going to be. So it's currently at 0. Let's set it to 10 and just focus on our shadows and see what they do. You can see now it's not a super crisp shadow. Even coming up here, the closer the object is to where it's casting a shadow, you're still going to be able to see kind of that funny scenario. But farther away, it just spreads right out. And you can see that it's taking longer to render as well. So let's bump this up to 20. This really spreads out. You can think of this as being if this chessboard was outside on a cloudy day as opposed to a really sunny day. Again, a really sunny day, it's going to be something like this. Set it to 2. So again, really harsh shadows, but again, this one, it's at 2%, and you can see how soft the outline of that shadow is. Take it down to 1%, gets a little bit more defined, and then take it to 0, and then you have really crisp, unnatural looking edges. So again, usually I would say 2-3% is the lowest you're going to want to go. I mean, sometimes 1%. I personally would just stay away from 0 unless you really need it for some reason. I'm going to try setting this to 8. And it really doesn't get what I want. There we go. So now we can see a hint of what's going on, but it's not so intense. And again, if this is something that, like you're seeing these lights and you just don't like how they read, you could pop this up a little bit more. Oops. set it to 30. So again, now we're not really seeing those shadows there, but everything is still well lit. So saying, I'll let you kind of mess around with the settings and see what you like. Only other thing is, let's change this gold a little bit around the edges. So what did I name that? Border gold right here. So roughness, we're going to take that down. Specular amount, take that up, increase it quite a bit. So yep, now I can see kind of these pieces reflecting in here and get some nice highlights. This is just kind of close to a gold color. So that pretty much does it for this video. We set up lights, we changed our materials, we changed the smoothing angle of our materials, and then again we changed a few light properties. So again, handful of stuff in this video. In the next video we'll go ahead and go over how to actually render out our object.